One day I got a call from a fellow resident of, excuse me, one day I got a call from a fellow working with one of the hip surgeons I was seeing, who basically said, nah, these hips aren't that bad, just, you seem fine, your levels aren't that bad, the x-rays look good, Pinnacle's a good hip. And then a couple days later, and it made me mad because I wanted him to order tests on my heart and my brain, because I was learning that's how the cobalt does its damage in many people's bodies, and he wouldn't order it. And so his fellow called me a couple days later, and he said, it doesn't seem like you're happy with the care you're getting. And we spent an hour on the phone, and he basically said, unfortunately, I have an interest in this because I actually lost a patient when I was a resident. One of my patients died from a heart issue that was caused by cobalt coming from her bad hip. And that's why I'm calling you back. Of course, he was just here for a short time, so I couldn't see him, but he too argued, we're not going to test your brain because we don't know what to do with the results. If the results come back and show that you have some brain damage or dysfunction, we don't really know what to do with that. And I said, well, it would help me decide, I have to get these things out right now. But it really feels like many surgeons are protecting the industry, and it's because it's such a lucrative arrangement. I mean, the hand that's feeding you is so big, why would you bite it? And they have nobody to help them. And I think about, I'm young, I'm a reporter, I'm curious, I was raised by a surgeon, I have an interest in medicine anyway, I can decipher some of the language when I read the studies. But I think about people who got these things who are, closer to 80 years old. Oh, too bad, grandma got her hip replaced, but, now she can't hear anymore and she's having heart problems. My husband's beloved grandfather got his hip replaced and he died a year later from bladder cancer. And looking back on that, I think, wow, what if it was caused by that? But nobody makes the associations, especially in these older people. But what might end up biting them in the behind is that they put so many of these hips in young, active patients. So some of us we're going to live, hopefully, 40, 50 more years with these hips and with the damage from the cobalt and the chromium. And that's a bad thing in some ways, because we don't know what systemic metal poisoning does to people over decades. I am Francis. I am Francis. So I don't know if I'm supposed to look in the camera to do that whole thing, but I can do it again looking in the camera. Okay, I'll do it again looking in the camera, just so we have two options. There's this. And the other thing is, so I ended up going to the Johnson & Johnson shareholders meeting. I was going to protest, and I felt like while I still have my ability to walk, somebody has to be the voice for all these people who are in wheelchairs, who have had their life destroyed, their finances destroyed. You lose your job, nobody knows why, you have to live off your savings. I mean, you just spiral downward financially, emotionally. Your family feels like, oh, what's wrong with her now? People blow you off. I mean, I lost relationships because of this. And and I'm not the only one. So I went to New Jersey to the shareholders meeting, and I had the chance actually to go in the meeting with a friend of mine. And when the Q&A session came up, I stood up and at the meeting in front of all the shareholders and the CEO and the Johnson family and the board members, and I said, I'm really scared. I have 2 metal on metal pinnacles, and they've hurt my friend. She's in her 40s, and she had to get a defibrillator, and she was told it was from the metal by a head cardiologist in her hospital. And I said, what are you going to do to help people like me? I have kids and a huge, long life ahead of me. And what if this does to me what it did to her? I'm really scared. And the CEO said, oh, we're going to get you help. These were well tested. And I said, well, I'm talking about 510K because they need to be tested on humans, because mine wasn't tested on humans, just on mechanical simulators. And he said, come on up after the meeting and we'll get you some help. And I really hoped and thought maybe he would get me to, some experts on tracking cobalt poisoning or something. And he was nice, and he introduced himself and told me, I just actually had my hip replaced too last fall. And I said, what did you get? Which one did you get? And he said, oh, I got the Pinnacle. And I was like, naively, I was like, the metal one? And he was like, oh, no. I mean, So he immediately introduced me to one of Johnson & Johnson's legal team, and he took my information and said, we'll be in touch. And the help that was coming, that was promised to me at the shareholders meeting, was an email from a third-party attorney saying, consult with your doctor and check the FDA's website. And when I wrote back, wow, because I was truly stunned, I got a scathing letter back from that attorney saying, just, you're an idiot, basically. And I considered writing back, but I thought, I'm not going to waste my time. And at that point I knew, they knew they were bad. They don't really want to help us. And that's kind of the worst part about this, is that I really trusted that people were basically good. There's some bad eggs, but I didn't think bad eggs could be I had worked for a corporation. I knew we weren't all out trying to hurt people, and there's no way there could be a corporation out to hurt people. My dad had been in the medical industry, but this really showed me that, all it takes is some really wicked decisions from a couple people at the top who have so much financially to gain from selling a bad device that's not tested on humans before it's sold, that the stakes are too high. And they'll never face jail time for their decisions because they're protected inside a corporation. And the worst part about it is, you think you're protected because of the FDA, and it turns out you're not. I mean, I don't mind if somebody sells me some snake oil and I know it's snake oil, and I make the decision. But the problem is, we thought we were being protected and we weren't. I mean, I've researched every night before work, after work, in the middle of the night. I spent months. I waited 6 months from the time they said you need a hip replacement to the time I got it, just reading. And I read about the cobalt poisoning, and I assumed that the FDA was checking. You would assume the FDA or someone is looking over all these studies and making sure that when they claim there are no financial conflicts of interest, when the author claims that it's true, but nobody polices that. And when I went to the trial, I found out one of the main studies that was put together and some marketing and sent to orthopedic surgeons all over the world, it was just lies. And it was lies created, the researcher who did it was a consultant for the company itself. So he's getting paid from the company himself. He created a nonprofit foundation, tax exempt 501c3 foundation. It was his foundation. The only people on the board were this man and his wife. And so Johnson & Johnson paid the corporation, got a tax credit for a donation that then went to this guy to do the research to say that this company's product was good. And this guy got a cut of every product was sold. So there were conflicts of interest all over the place. I learned that at trial. But even my surgeons probably don't realize that the medical literature and who's funding the studies and whether or not there are conflicts of interest being disclosed, nobody's policing any of that. And there are no fines, there's no police that come and chase you down if you say you didn't have a conflict of interest when you did a study and you really did. Not that anyone's even looking to see if you do. It's just unbelievable. And it's been what I've dealt with for 6 years now, and it's going to be what I deal with for the rest of my life.